a sense of pride. I'm really honored to be here. And on behalf of Land Legal, I want to thank you for all the hard work that you do every day, all the lives that you live every day out loud and proud. And I want to briefly tell you about a couple of victories that have happened in the last year and in the last month. February 2012 seems to be the tipping point month for a lot of our causes, especially marriage equality. And so I would like to ask Dave to walk us through a couple of things that have happened in the last year. So I want to mention someone that has been such an inspiration for Land Legal. Janice Langman was a person who decided to bring a lawsuit because at the crucial point where her partner was about to die, she was not allowed to visit her in the hospital. Janice decided to come to Land Legal and say, I want to fight for this. And unfortunately, we lost in court. But it was at a time in which the Obama administration was beginning to pay more attention to issues that affect our communities. It was an evening of 2010 when Janice got a call from President Obama apologizing for the moment in which she could not be with her spouse when she died. And in January of 2011, hospital visitation regulations were passed by which now people can determine who is allowed to visit them in the hospital. So that was a great victory.
Yeah.
I also want to acknowledge people across the country that have done tremendous things to defend their rights in the workplace. I want to talk about a professor at a community college. Her name is Jackie Gill. Jackie Gill taught at a community college for a one-year contract, and after a couple of renewals of her one-year contract, she realized that she was not being given permanent positions at this community college. She, again, was a woman of great strength, came forward and said, this is happening to me because of my sexual orientation. I have heard comments. And in 2011, Land Legal helped her file a lawsuit and challenge workplace discrimination. So I really want to acknowledge that there are so many cases and so many other organizations that are doing work in terms of workplace issues. But this is definitely an area where we still need to fight for more protections, right? There's many states out there that you can still just be fired for being gay. And then we have this huge, big victory. 2011 also marked the end of Don't Ask, Don't Tell. I can tell you this was absolutely not a short battle. It took about 18 years. It took about 13,000 service members discharged. It took the courage of many of them to come forward and challenge this policy. And so I really want to acknowledge all the service members that had to come out and had to really put their lives and their careers on the line to make this happen. And I want to talk beyond our usual issues as well. And this is what makes me really excited to talk tonight to you about making history and making the history that makes our movement different. It makes our movement more diverse. It makes the voices in our movement more special. And so in these past years, we have seen more and more issues that are not the traditional mainstream issues, right? So I want to talk to you about Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, the ACLU of Wisconsin and Land Legal brought a case on behalf of transgender inmates who were not allowed to receive medical treatment they needed in prison. And as you can tell, this may not be the most upfront, popular issue. It caused a lot of controversy, but in the end, there was a circuit court that decided that not providing the medical treatment to transgender inmates that they needed, including hormone treatment and sex reassignment surgery, was cruel and unusual punishment. So that's a great victory. State employees and how important they are in sort of setting the framework by which all other employers and private companies should really treat all employees equally. And I want to talk about Arizona. In Arizona, there was a health benefit board that denied coverage for domestic partnerships. And this law is being challenged in Arizona. And the court decided in the summer of 2011 that for the time being there was a temporary restraining order issued that the state needed to continue to provide the benefits until until the case moved forward in the courts. And so that was a victory that, you know, could give the possibility of this extending until the court decides the issue. I want to talk about discrimination in non-workplace issues as well. Lambda Legal filed a case here in New York. Someone who went to dine at a Sisco restaurant, Lisa Freelander, was discriminated against and assaulted by a manager, and she was a very strong person to say this should not happen to me, it should not happen to anyone, and public accommodations should be places where we could come and enjoy our time with our families and friends. And so she was the first case in New York that is using the human rights laws that apply to public accommodations to say we should not be discriminated against because of a sexual orientation in places like a restaurant. I want to talk about the work that we've been doing with regard to immigrants. Many of the conditions in immigration detention centers are pretty awful, and for LGBT immigrants are even worse. We have heard of cases where people are denied HIV medication while they're in detention. They are beaten, they are tortured, they are sexually harassed. And in July of 2011, there were several complaints filed by the National Immigrant Justice Coalition, and many of the LGBT organizations joined in a letter of support saying LGBT immigrants are also part of our community and we would like to have fair treatment of them and their civil rights protected in the immigration context. I want to talk about a case that I litigated a few years ago. And the reason why this case is very important to me is because I work with young people across the country. I work with young LGBT teenagers who happen to be in foster care, juvenile detention, or homeless. And unfortunately, these people are very vulnerable. They have suffered rejection from family, rejection from school, and they have engaged in some type of survival crime. And I want to tell you about Victoria. Victoria, when I met her, she was about 16 years old. She was a transgender woman. She identified as a heterosexual female, and she was in a boys' juvenile detention facility. She was not respected in her gender identity. She was verbally abused. She had been beaten, and she said, I really want to do something. And I really respect her for that. She was 16 years old. Today, Victoria is over 18. Today, her case has settled, but the most important part of her case is that the Youth Study Center in Pennsylvania became the first secure detention facility in Pennsylvania to have a policy that says how should they treat LGBT young people? How should they provide them with hormones if they need them? How should they respond to their needs? And so I think I really want to celebrate Victoria's courage, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't have a client. And if it wasn't for her courage in keeping this lawsuit going, there wouldn't be the policy change that happened. And so I really want to celebrate her because beyond all of the equality fights that we fight, there are young people out there that have as much courage as we do, and I really admire that. So I really want to get her. More exciting things happened in New York, 2011. This is a picture of Phyllis Siegel and Connie Coppola. I think you may know who they are. They had a 23-year relationship that culminated in getting married. They were the first couple to get married in Manhattan. And this is a celebration when they just got their certificate. Next, I want to talk about Oregon. And I want to say some of these cases have been brought by Lambda and other colleague organizations, but it really represents what's happening across the country. And so I really want to give recognition to all transgender men and transgender women who are coming forward. I think in this past few years, we've seen many of them saying discrimination should not be happening against transgender people. And so this picture has Alec Esquivel. Alec is an Oregon State employee who had been going through a transition, was diagnosed with gender identity disorder, and there were some surgical procedures that were ordered by his doctor. The health benefits plan from the state of Oregon denied coverage for some of these procedures, and Alec was not happy with that and said healthcare coverage for transgender people should be a right, and it should be given regardless of your gender identity, or regardless of whether you transition, or regardless of who you are. And so this was the first lawsuit in Oregon to challenge healthcare coverage for transgender people. The other part of the work that I do is to assist LGBT adults who want to become foster and adoptive parents of children in the foster care system. And so I want to tell you a little bit about an Illinois case. Civil units in Illinois were enacted recently. Soon thereafter, the Child Welfare Agency was about to renew their contracts for child welfare agencies, and Catholic Charities sued the state of Illinois, saying, if you're going to make us license LGBT people to become foster parents, we cannot practice our religious beliefs and stay in business. Land Legal filed an amicus brief in this case, so did the ACLU, and after several months of legal papers being filed, Catholic Charities backed up and said, we're not going to litigate anymore. We're going to transfer our cases to other nonprofits that can do this work. And I really want to give praise to the state of Illinois, because it really stood up and said, our laws prohibit discrimination, and any organization that's going to contract with the state, they have to abide by our laws. And so I really want to give praise to Illinois state. That takes us to Georgia. And so I want to talk about Vandy Beth Glenn. And I actually, this is a point where we can show a little video after I talk. But so Vandy Beth Glenn is another crusader for transgender rights. She realized she was about to transition. She had a job in the assembly in Georgia. And at the point that she said, I'm ready to transition, I'm going to come and dress as a woman tomorrow, she was fired. And so I want to show a clip of the news about her case to learn more about what she did.
Vandy Beth Glenn lost her state job when her boss found out she was undergoing a sex change. Well, now a federal judge in Atlanta has ruled in Glenn's favor.
I was working at the Office of Legislative Counsel at the Georgia General Assembly, still living as a man, but the time had come for me to complete my workplace transition. So I informed my boss, and a few weeks later he called me into his office. First he asked me to confirm that I did intend to transition. And when I did, he said that that cannot happen appropriately in this workplace.
In his deposition, Sewell Brumby said, I think it's unsettling to think of someone dressed in women's clothing with male sexual organs inside that clothing. I think some members of the legislature would view that taking place in our office as perhaps immoral, perhaps unnatural, and perhaps, if you will, liberal or ultra-liberal.
I was in my legal office in Atlanta. I knew that they would do everything they could. If there was anything they could do, even if I couldn't get my job back, then maybe I could do something to help others like me in the future.
Discrimination is wrong, and thanks to Vandy Beth and her willingness to stand up to discrimination, we are able to chip away at it.
The defendants in our case appealed to the 11th Circuit. I'm confident and hopeful that the 11th Circuit is going to see the truth of our position and how I was mistreated, just like the district court did. We do have a lot of work ahead of us, but the work is getting done. Many more states now have employment protections. This isn't about me, it's about all of us. It's not even about trans people, it's about the right of everybody to be treated with dignity and to be treated as a full member of society.
So Vandy Beth has really been at the forefront of transgender rights, and this is the time. This is the time for new changes. This is the time to make this an inclusive movement. I want to talk about Prop 8. And I want to really thank